the shit that society seems to feed us, kind of like trying to get us to click links and buy shit. And how do we actually tap into what it is that kind of like is actually rich and true and real for us? So I'll ask you some questions. We can dive into that. But before
Speaking of diving, I was just reading a little section about dumpster diving in Japan.
yeah, that was part of my journey.
Yeah,
I learned a lot from that because, part of that journey was around being seen as like the lowest class in a society. What does it look
right,
like to actually be
right. It was
seen?
a self-image issue.
It's a total self-image issue for me anyway. The food wasn't actually that bad. The food's
Yeah,
not preferable, but not fine,
yeah,
but fine. But the self-image that then is around that from all the conditioning from family and society that you're supposed to become somebody, and the last thing you want is
yeah,
to be in this position. And then to be in that position and go, it's actually not that bad if you don't have the story that you shouldn't be in that position. And I know both of us have been impacted by lots of teachers, including Eckhart, and other ones, Eckhart Tolle, who kind of talks about that power of like the narratives that run our life, and can we become more aware or conscious or attuned to those narratives so they don't like run our lives. And so that was a interesting experience for me, and that's why I kind of put it in the beginning of the book, because it's such a reflection of how much do we actually go with our actual experience, and then how much are we trying to make our appearance, our image acceptable to the rest of the world, and to have people kind of see me as the lower, and this Tatum on the pull, or the status level of life, was both hard and also beautiful, because I realized like, oh, there's nothing to like, I've always worked so hard to prevent myself from being in any situation like this. And knowing that I could be in a situation like that and still be okay, it kind of reduced a certain level of fear and a certain level of like trying, that it's still motivating my life. And I'm not saying it's completely gone, Gabor, but one of the things I remember from you, we were driving. If you remember when I came to interview you, you're driving me to the airport. And Ray was like, "Don't drive. Don't let Gabor drive you to the airport." And you're like, "I can drive him to the airport." And you're driving to the airport. And you said, Soren, I can't remember who you quoted, but you were quoting somebody. You said, I think I've done enough, but I don't know if I am enough.
That's Peter Levine and the trauma teacher, psychologist, and he,
That stuck with me so long. Like, I think I've done enough, but I don't know if I am enough.
yeah.
So I thought maybe we could just kind of start with that piece and just explore like, what does that mean to be enough? And how are you in that journey in your own life? Because I know for years you worked largely invisible, like you were doing stuff, really important stuff, but for whatever the world wasn't really giving you the attention.
Well, the way I put that is that I've always been famous. It's just that nobody ever heard of me.
Yeah. And the other thing I think you said that you became an overnight success, and it just took 70 years or something, or 60 years. It was,
Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was sort of gradual, but there was certainly a sense that I had that what I had to say was more important than the world has yet to recognize. And it goes back to what you said earlier about um, if I'm going to be frustrated about that, that has to do with how I want to be seen by other people.
yeah,
Otherwise, you just do what you do,
yeah,
and it has the impact that it has when it has. And Ray, my wife always said to me, "Don't worry about it. Just do the work. Let the work do the work for you. Don't try
yeah,
and push it." But part of me, of course, wanted the ego recognition,
yeah,
and and so that going back to the question about uh, have I done enough or am I enough? Peter Levine said that once, and Peter is a year or two older than I am. He's 83 now, maybe 82. And of course, he's one of the pioneers of trauma work. And when I heard that question, my answer was, well, there is no answer to that question. There's actually no answer to that question. The real question is, who's even asking?
yeah,
Like, you know,
yeah,
like who's the one that doubts that one is enough just as a human being?
yeah,
And
yeah,
that, in other words, I think it's the only it's only the now Peter might not agree with me,
Yeah.
but I think it's the ego that's asking that question. And the ego itself is a construct that we develop precisely because we don't believe that we're enough, and then what matters is how we look to others. And Thomas Merton, the Catholic monks, talked about it's a strange life when you're living in the minds of other people. And so if
Yeah.
we're concerned with what other people think of us or how they view us or how they admire us or how they dislike us, then we're actually living in the minds of other people.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so that question of am I enough, I think comes from that area.
Yeah. This the place of separation or the place of not being
Yeah.
connected to the source.
Have you ever looked up the meaning of the word separation or the word origin?
No, but I have a whole chapter on it. I have separation and non-separation, but I've never looked up the word.
Well, recently I ran across the word origin, and it comes from two Latin words. One is for disjointed or cut apart,
Mm.
and the other is to prepare.
Mm.
Basically, when we perceive ourselves as a separate self, we're preparing to be disjointed, to cut off from the rest of the world.
Wow. Wow. And you see the way that that's not to get too much on the society, but you see the way that that's fed because if
Yeah,
people feel separate, you can convince them to do all kinds of things, right?
yeah,
To get behind authoritarian regimes that are killing people, to buy shit that they don't need, to believe certain mindsets. And I think, part of what I see that's happening in AI can actually make that worse if we're not careful. Part of what I see, and I don't know if you see this too, Gabor, is that humanity is kind of coming into a crisis point where are we going to live largely from that egoic mind that thinks it's separate, or is humanity going to wake up and be able to see the stories that have kind of conditioned our world and to see that what actually unites us and can we kind of live and create cultures from that place? I don't know if both can continue at the pace that they're continuing. It feels like there's a breaking point. I don't know how you see that.
well, so there's nothing new about humanity living from that egoic place. In fact, that has been the case ever since what we call civilization arose. What we're up against now is the inescapability of the unsustainability of it.
Yeah,
You know, but ever since we've had civilization, we've had ego running the world, and increasingly the male ego
yeah,
running the world. What we're up against now is that anybody with an open mind can tell that it's no longer sustainable, that it's just time limited, that it can't possibly keep expanding
yeah,
the way it is, and already we're in such deep trouble. And
yeah,
so the real question is, can we actually have civilization without the ego? Because if we can't,
yeah,
it's over.
yeah. I was reading, this was a while back, but Meta that owns Instagram and Facebook and things were bragging to investors that advancements in their AI increased user
Yeah,
time on Instagram by 24%. So the AI gets to know you so well that it can just keep you where it wants to keep you, if it wants to keep you on their platform. So this is what I think is slightly different about our times and other times is the level of conditioning that we're all receiving that's basically from an
yeah,
algorithm that has a particular goal. And that can only go so far. I mean, the loneliness of children in the United States and the unhappiness of teenagers is a reflection of just how damaging these stories are because nobody ever wins with those stories. And I see, Gabor, like it was so amazing when your book came out. I was traveling and I'm sitting next to this like 30-year-old guy on the airplane, and he's reading your book. And I
the
pull
myth
out my copy of the book,
what the myth of normal?
Rhythm Normal. Yeah,
Okay.
and we're both reading your book.
Yeah.
Then I get to New York, I go into like a store, and this woman in her backpack has your book. So it's both seems to be getting worse, but there's also this huge awakening of interest in healing and in trauma and in practice of different kinds, whether it's meditation or something else, psychedelics. Do you, I mean, you must see both of these worlds both kind of like gaining steam, yes?
Well, Hegel and Karl Marx, they talked about dialectics, and how each society creates its own contradiction, or gestates its own
Mhm.
contradiction. Now, the world is becoming more. Let me read you something. A couple of weeks ago, I um, I was in Washington D.C. and to be for an interview with Al Jazeera, and I met the person interviewed after me was none other than the niece of your current president, Donald Trump,
Wow.
Mary Trump. Now, do you know about Mary Trump?
I do. She's written several books, and I know
Right,
she,
right.
yeah.
So she's a psychologist, and she comes from the same traumatized family. It's a highly traumatized family, and so she writes. So I met her. She's a wonderful person, and she writes that our current trauma is the combination of our history, the logical outcome of the stories we tell ourselves, the myths we embrace, and the lies that we perpetuate.
Mm,
Trauma shapes us in ways we may not be aware of and will always do so unless we face what has happened to us, what we've done to ourselves, what we've done to each other. Without looking through that lens, we cannot fully understand what has unfolded. Now,
wow.
so
Wow.
it's almost like within the same family, you have thesis and antithesis.
Yeah.
You have what in Donald Trump, you have a person who Bessel van der Kolk, the trauma psychiatrist, has called a poster boy for trauma, a poster child for trauma, which is what he is, which is now inflicting on the rest of the world. Then you have the antithesis, this healing presence, this wise, insightful, self-aware person, Mary Trump, come from the same vortex of this
Yeah.
generational traumatic background. So, what I'm saying is, just as the world is whirling towards catastrophe, more and more people are also waking up.
Yeah. Feels that way.
So, so that my book and the book of other people, what you're writing, people are questioning, questing, inquiring. They just want to know what the heck's going on. So I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
to go back to this cliche about the Chinese character for crisis, it's made up of two symbols. One is for danger, the other is opportunity. So that
Hmm. Hmm.
we're in danger. At the
Yeah.
same time, there's an opportunity to wake up. And I think it's going both ways.
Yeah.
And I don't I can't predict which way it's going to go. What I do know right now, if you have a panel discussion as to which National Football League star is sleeping with which pop star,
Mhm.
you're going to get far more attention than if you talk about how children are starving to death in Gaza. You know?
Yeah.
And that's the world that we live in.
Yeah. How do you see Gabor this part? One of the things that I think Trump represents is he's just like, of course I'm self-interested. Of course I'm going to use the presidency to benefit myself. What do you think? I'm stupid? Like,
Yeah,
I'm just going to be out there and name it. And like, of
yeah,
course we're all greedy. I'm going to be as greedy as possible. And
yeah.
it feels like on the other side, the Democrats have been trying to be so righteous and right and proper and perfect and canceling people and just like and so it feels that there is something to be learned on both sides. And I'm curious how you look at what are the lessons for those people who maybe consider themselves liberal or left can learn considering this is the current expression that we're seeing or how do you see that those
Well,
tensions?
first of all, Trump said, I'm quoting him verbatim in his book, The Art of the Deal. Well, I'm paraphrasing him verbatim. I mean, I have the exact words, but he said, the world is a horrible place. It's dog eat dog. Everybody's against you. Your friends want your wealth. They want your house. They want your wife. And these are your friends.
Yeah,
Okay. No. And he believes that that's how the world is.
yeah.
Now, if you believe that's how the world is, you have to be grandiose, you have to be aggressive, you have to be selfish, you have to be suspicious, you have to be greedy. Otherwise, how are you going to survive? And like the Buddha said, with our minds we create the world. Now that's the world that his mind has created. what the Buddha didn't say, this is modern psychology, and what Trump doesn't realize is that before, with that mind, he creates the world created his mind based on the
Mhm.
early trauma that he had. So his worldview is a perfectly legitimate response to the experience that he had with a father who Mary Trump calls a sociopath and a mother who was completely emotionally and physically unavailable. So
Yeah,
that's a normal worldview to arise from that child's experience, and
yeah,
that's the world that he lives in.
yeah.
Now, the only difference between him and the Democrats, as I'm concerned, he's far more honest than the Democrats.
Yeah, does seem that way sometimes.
You
I think he's
like
less ethical, but he's more honest.
and people see him as genuine. Well, he's genuine in his in his non-genuineness. You know, like let's face it. As Ralph Nader said, it's like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, as far as I'm concerned. You
Yeah.
know,
And so,
when was it the case that the corporations did not run the United States? You know, there was a period in the New Deal when they tried to rein them in a bit and so on, buy off the working class. That was a very short period in American history.
yeah,
Before then, you had the robber barons, all these
yeah,
mass gangsters like the Rockefellers and others, you know, gathering all the wealth, all the money, based on slavery, based on ruthless exploitation of poor people, based on the police keeping the working class in check, you know. So and I got this book here on my shelf, called How the Other Half Lives by
mm,
Jacob Riis,
hmm,
written in the late 19th century. It's about the tenements of New York.
hmm. Wow.
And how, so the
Sounds
only
like people's history that
so
Zen.
honest to God, the only difference now is that is that the gloves are off, whereas
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Democrats, they have nice velvet gloves on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity in this particular situation for this to run itself in whatever full expression it needs to be run. And then the question is, does that all come tumbling down? And is there maybe at last the chance to rebuild something from a different quality of care and from a different quality of attention that's not based on a trauma, a personal or societal trauma? And it doesn't seem hopeful, but in some ways, I'm excited to actually see something that's always been kind of under the covers, kind of like feels like it's getting the full expression now, and we get to see actually where this takes us. And I think where it's going to take us, I'm been more interested in the AI world, these days, and with this new super
Um,
intelligence we
you
can
know,
go into or
yeah,
not go into, it just exaggerates everything. So it's like whatever powers you have, you can use them for good or for bad. But now there's like this extra intelligence and this extra kind of capacity. And so it feels to me like, Gabor, like something is coming to a head, and the capacity of human beings to wake up is like paramount in this situation. And I can't control that. I mean, I can write my books, you can write your books, you can do your talks, and we can kind of share what our journey is, because I
yeah,
don't think anybody can wake anybody else up. And it's not like I'm totally woke up. I'm trying to wake up, I'm doing my best to wake up. But what excites me actually, Gabor, is if imagine a movement of non-separation. Because usually in the past, these movements of separation, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, they're wrong, we're right. But what does a movement of non-separation look like, where we actually own that all these qualities are also in us? And for the benefit of all sentient beings, we're going to move something in a particular direction, not based on othering. And I'm curious if you have any insights into some possible way that that might emerge. Or
no.
whether you disagree with me.
Yeah, the answer is no. Uh, I don't regard myself as a non-dualist teacher, you know. Um, I can recognize certain patterns, uh, but I've not had a non-dual experience. I've known people who have, so I can't speak about it from an experiential perspective. Um, what to say?
But do you sense that?
There's so much to unpack in what you just said. Like, first of all, the AI thing. Like, you're far more attuned to the AI world than I am. I rather my tendency is rather than I don't know anything about it. I don't even want to know about it, you know. I don't want one more thing to find out about. And furthermore, as with all technologies, I think they're neutral. In themselves, they're neutral. It's a question of like nuclear energy is neutral.
Hmm.
You can
Yeah.
use it to power electricity, or you can use it to destroy millions of human lives.
Yeah.
And it's a question of who's using it for what intention. And
Yeah.
so, as far as AI is concerned, I'm sure it has tremendous capacity to bring people together.
Mm.
I also have no confidence whatsoever that'll be used for that to that purpose, because in a system that's based on separation, it's going to be another tool of separation as far as I'm concerned. And I don't care. I don't even care what the intentions are. Like I know, you know, Sam Altman and all these people involved in AI. I don't even care that what their intentions are. I don't know what their intentions are, but I think it's beyond their intentions. I think the system will shape this method technology to its own intentions. Like look at the internet. So it can be used for conversations such as this, and certainly my work is known to millions of people
Yeah.
because of the internet. But on the one hand, on the other hand, if I could snap my fingers and make the internet disappear, I would, because I think the overall impact on the world is absolutely negative in
Yeah.
terms of what it does to people's brains, people's consciousness, people's lack of awareness, keeping people in bubbles of information. Um, so again, to me, it's all a question of what bends a particular technology or methodology to its
Yeah.
own intentions. And this system is designed to maintain itself. So I'm rambling, I suppose, but you asked me,
I hear you. Well, I do
do
think,
I have a way out? No, I don't have a way out. I all I can, I mean, I can imagine ways out, but so what?
Mhm.
Um, the issue is, how do you see your role? How do you see my role? Anybody on this call, how do they see their role?
Yeah.
I see myself as just saying as clearly as I can, people, here's how I think it is.
Hmm.
Here's what I think we need to know. And trust that people will use. I just want to wake people up to the importance of inquiry itself,
Hmm.
you know, of questioning everything. And where that'll take us, I don't know.
Yeah. When I was writing the book, what I really wanted to do is to kind of share a personal experience and to end some of the chapters with just inquiries, which is like what stories run your life, what stories still kind of like shape your life. And
Yeah,
I think that inquiry opens up a channel of exploration. Now, we might not have the capacity at certain times to actually see the truth of what that is. Like I do think that human beings have a capacity. And if I tell you something, Gabor, hey, I'm noticing this tendency in you, you might be super well-meaning. You just don't have the capacity in that moment to
yeah,
absorb or take in that worldview or that perspective. And so I feel like, but that inquiry is the best way we can go, which is just like holding that question for that person to then hopefully develop more of that capacity. And
yeah,
and then how do we do that both individually, but then is there a collective building of capacity so that we can begin to see different ways that we're destroying ourselves and destroying other people. But I think the ego structure is so delicate sometimes that it can't see that. It's just like Trump wants to ban all the books that have anything negative about U.S. history in them, because that becomes very tender, right, to the more the ego structure, which is like. But I do feel like there's a need that we all have to basically see ourselves as good people, and I'm curious whether how you see that playing, because when you bring too much to light to somebody in their awareness, it feels overwhelming to them. But that's also the secret to learning and growing, is to be able to see ways in which we're acting unskillfully.
recently I ran across a kind of a description of the yogic concept of mind.
Mm,
And it's got all these different compartments. I'll never remember what they are, but
mm,
there are four major divisions: memory, awareness, discernment, the capacity to discern,
mhm,
and identification. What do you identify with?
mhm,
Now, in my view, most people's intellects are governed by what they identify with. So as much as they think they're thinking rationally, it's
Yeah.
actually the identification unconsciously that
Yeah.
governs what they see and what they don't see, what they're
Yeah.
capable of recognizing, what they're not capable of recognizing. Now, when you said Trump wants to cut out anything negative about human history, American history, I'm not talking about negative, we're talking about the truth.
Yeah.
Was there slavery or was there not slavery? Was
Mhm.
slavery brutal or was it benign? Has there been discrimination? Has there been violence, brutality? Have there been the deaths of millions of Asians in the
Mhm.
hands of Europeans? Or did somebody just invent that? You know,
Mhm.
is it the case that the Dutch killed 275,000 Indonesians after the Second World War in their attempt to hold on to their colonies? And if that's the case, how come we're not teaching this in our school? Is it the case that 100,000 Guatemalans were killed by American death squads in the 1990s? 100,000? And there's 1 in a million Americans even know that?
Mhm.
I could go on. And what
Yeah.
I'm saying is that because they identify with we have to be perfect because we can't stand that we're not.
Yeah.
And so and these are, and I could talk about the current horrors that we're witnessing in the world today, and perfectly good people who are kind to their dogs, better to their children than maybe I was to my children, and loving their spouses
Mm.
will justify the death by hunger of
Yeah.
children as necessary. Why?
Mhm.
Because they identify with something.
Yeah.
Their identity doesn't permit them to actually look at the truth. And we're
Yeah.
talking about well-intentioned people.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, this question of identity, unconscious identification, which is, as you suggest, wants to exclude the vulnerable parts
Yeah.
because it's too painful,
Yeah.
too painful. And so I think that's the real issue. And unfortunately, there's too many ways in this society where people are brought up to identify,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's more important than what is actually the truth. So the intellect becomes a servant of the identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you notice that begins? I know inquiry is one, but is there anything else you notice that allows that to soften? So one of the things I've noticed is either enormous success or enormous failure. Like it makes you
Exactly.
question the story because it's like the story doesn't work out the way that you thought it would work out. You either get what you wanted and you realize I'm still lonely and isolated, and
Exactly.
or you don't get it and you're like shit. So it seems though that Gabor, like, do you have any pieces that we can all kind of like take and begin to kind of bring into our lives around how do we become in some ways more curious about the stories that run us rather than having to go to these extremes to kind of have those moments of disillusionment, which I've always loved the word disillusionment. It means you're not seeing the illusion, right, anymore. And
Yeah.
I feel like, coming back to the present moment, I know we both kind of like you know, uh, been impacted by Eckhart Tolle and other people. Could you say a little bit about how that plays in your life?
Well, I think the issue that you're touching on is just a very willingness to be curious. Because I know probably in your relationship with Cecily and my relationship with Ray, as soon as we think we know, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I thought it was just us. It's
yeah, yeah.
universal. Okay.
So when stuff happens and I'm convinced that it's this way,
Yeah.
that's when it
Yeah.
that's when the pall of death begins to overshadow the live reality.
Yeah. And Ray doesn't step down. I've seen her, you guys. She's not one
Yeah.
to roll over. Yeah.
And so, the actual question is, am I willing to be questioning my assumptions in a given moment?
Yeah.
You know, and am I willing to even recognize that I'm making assumptions?
Yeah.
Uh, So that's the key question.
Yeah. And to
A
see
lot
that,
of a lot of people are not. They just know. They
right.
know that this is what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And to see I think what's fascinating is to see the cultural conditioning that we've received that then has us hold a particular view. And it's like both ours, but it's also the cultural myth. And one of the things I love about going to different cultures is I begin to question the myth that I grew up with because I'm
Yeah.
seeing other myths and other things about what power means or what strength means or what money or success means. And so it's like they just have a different story that they developed.
Oh yeah. Well, look. So here in what you guys call the Pacific Northwest,
Our 52nd state is what we call it. Or what is it? Yeah.
uh, you know, they used to have these potlatches where big events, meals, where the host would give away their wealth to the guests.
Wow.
And the British colonialists forbade that,
Wow.
completely contrary to the capitalist ethic.
Wow.
And so wealth was measured not by what you gathered, but by what you gave away.
Wow.
No, who even thinks of that, you know?
Yeah.
And by the way, this is true of indigenous people internationally.
Yeah.
It's a completely different conception of
Yeah.
what success is, you know? And what you said about there's two ways of finding out reality. One is to fail. And at some point, if you keep failing, you might ask yourself, well, is there something about the way I'm approaching it? You know, so that's true. Success is can be just as powerful a teacher, you know, because I mean, if I only had a New York Times bestseller, okay,
Yeah.
so I did, and you know what? I was just as miserable afterwards, or at
Yeah.
least I
I think you've had three. I think numerous ones then became best.
no, no only two.
Or just
Sorry.
only two. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
when you get the third, that's when it happens, I'm
Oh,
told.
I have to wait for the next one. Okay, good. Something to look forward to.
So what was that like getting that and then noticing the dissatisfaction or noticing that externally I always like to say if no shift in the external can unresolve what's not, satiated or at home in the internal. So the external had changed and you notice the internal hadn't changed. Is that correct?
Well, it's that what was capable of being miserable before was still capable of being miserable.
That's great. Yeah.
And not that it always was, not that it always was,
Yeah.
but it could show up,
Yeah.
you know, and no external success in any way would mitigate the internal misery.
Oh,
Um, that had to be looked at it in its own terms. Now, if I can be curious about that misery
yeah.
and say,
Yeah.
okay, well,
Yeah.
what am I believing right now, and
Yeah.
where does this belief come from?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
misery, yeah,
I
but
see people in Silicon Valley where they'll have something like that. They'll have a big, we call it liquidity event where they'll sell their business, make a bunch of money, and they're
yeah,
still unsatisfied. And then they come to the story that they just needed more of what they didn't work the first time.
yeah,
There's this constant thing to get more because certainly if you just add on another bestseller, add on something else to the story of me,
yeah,
clearly that's going to satiate, even though the direct experience is actually that story of me, that story of some future external that makes us more internally at peace or at ease is
which
more.
reflects, by the way, the economic orientation of the society, because we talking about the growth, it has to keep growing, and the GDP has to keep growing. Why?
Yeah.
What we're not talking about is how to share it more equitably.
Yeah.
What we're not talking about is that we have more than enough,
Yeah.
even as people are homeless in the U.S.
Yeah.
The amount of wealth it's incredible. I mean, I just came back from a speaking trip, Eastern United States, including New York, and to get a ride to the airport, it's $150.
Hmm.
Now that's all right if you're a well-paid professional like I am.
Yeah.
But what do people do who don't make $15 an hour? You
Yeah.
know, and but the question we're not asking, this society is never going to ask the question, how can we be equitable? The question that keeps being asked is, how can I get more and more and more and more and more? And
Yeah, and we're proud of the fact that we can birth Elon Musk, who has 300 or 400 billion, right?
Yeah,
That's like a sense of pride versus like, wow, more people on the bottom actually are getting livable wages. So why not? Why shouldn't that actually be something we're proud
exactly.
of, and less proud
Yeah,
to have gazillionaires who are lonely and unhappy and and have resources. And so I do feel like I'm a little more on the hopeful side, Gabor. I think there's a possibility that that narrative shifts. And I think there's a possibility that there's a particular approach
sure.
that we,
Well, I mean, nobody would be doing the work. I wouldn't be doing my work if I didn't think that there were possibilities, and you wouldn't be, and other people that we know wouldn't be doing their work if we didn't believe in some degree of possibility.
yeah,
Question is when, and will it be in time, and meanwhile, how many more people are going to suffer?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. For me, part of it, we all do our own karmic. I like the word karmic assignment. I got that from John Kabat-Zinn. Like we all have our own, what for whatever reason, whether it's writing or as a therapist or as a teacher or as a restaurant worker, or whatever our assignment is. And I find myself, just coming back to this question, which is just like, what actually is essential to me, and how does
yeah,
that want to take shape in the world of form? So what really matters to me, and then how do I want to bring, or actually, and I'd be curious about your thoughts, because like Eckhart says, don't ask what you want to do, ask what the world wants to do through you.
yeah,
So for me, it's like what actually matters, what actually is essential, and then what seems like it wants to come through as an expression. But that expression is not to make me a better person.
yeah,
Expression isn't to build up like I'm lacking, and this expression now is going to make me not, make me full. But it's an
yeah,
expression that actually feels full in itself and
yes.
wants to create, just like the universe creates and trees grow and life unfolds. And to me, when I'm in that space, that's the space that I feel like I want to cultivate and I want to support.
Well, your book is called is it called Essential?
It's called the essential, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the Essential. And have you've had Almas at your conferences, haven't you?
Never, never.
Never? No, okay. Well, he's written a book called Essence.
Okay.
That's the first book of his that I read. It's called Essence.
Mm,
And that we all have this essential self that we're born with.
hmm.
And then as that essential self is not recognized or respected or being mirrored by the world, we shut it down. And instead we develop the personality
Yeah.
and all its egotistical beliefs. So in this book, Essential, really that's what you're looking for.
Hmm.
Is,
Very similar.
is you're looking for the essence. Uh,
Yeah.
and
And my theory is that part of what's happening is artificial intelligence is going to increase, like, people use the example of nuclear weapons. They say, well, nuclear weapons were created and we found a way to manage and live with them. Only very, very, very few countries or people have access to nuclear weapons. AI is something that's going to have be access to all of us. And so it'll be the superpower that now
sure,
is landing here that's going to allow us to do all these incredible things. And I totally agree with you. It's the consciousness of the person using it that really,
yeah,
really matters the most. So there's all this attention on how do we advance AI? How do we advance AI? I'm like, how do we advance humanity? Like the AI is definitely going to advance. Humans, like, I don't know if we're it's not certain that we will also advance. And so what does it mean for humans to advance, which is, of course, a centuries old kind of inquiry. But I actually feel, Gabor, like something could happen now in this time of incredible world chaos and with AI emergent, that we're kind of forced to shift in a way that maybe we haven't been in the past. And so I just want to do my part in that exploration. Not that I know the answers, but like I want to put my piece of the puzzle in and see if we can kind of move that forward.
and what is essentiality?
That's a really good question. Um, I mean, the first thing that comes up is consciousness. Like, am I aware in this moment right now? Am I here for the moment that I'm living in? Am
Okay,
I like present and able to kind of like meet this moment as it is? And then there's
okay,
second,
okay. Well, let me stop you.
sure.
So are you?
In this moment, I feel quite present. I don't know if there's like
Yeah,
if I can take 1 to 100%, but I'm loving
yeah,
talking to you. I'm loving that this can be shared, and I have
great,
a lot of excitement, and so I do feel that this moment right now, I feel quite present for.
great.
And I know that in order for me to do that, relationships really matter. When I have conflict or tension, I need to,
Yeah,
work on
yeah,
those pieces. I
yeah,
need to kind of connect with my body and make sure that my body is like getting exercise and rest and good food and the things that kind
yeah,
of care for my body. I
mm,
need quality friends. One of the things I've recognized, Gabor, is I'll have days where I'm on the computer screen most of the day, and I'll have days where I'm going for a walk with a friend for a couple hours. The
mm,
days I have some human connection for those walks are just like so much more nourishing for me. So that's like something that's really, really essential. And then
yeah,
having a sense of purpose that my life is, not, it's not an accident. Like there's some gift for me to kind of participate in and support and bring forth. And it can't just be about me. It's about kind of building a field of a field of awareness that we all incorporate in. And whenever I'm in that field of awareness with people, that feels like it's like I don't need to be the teacher. I just want to be a participant, in building that field. And that to
mm.
me, like this session right now, where we get to engage, but other people are a part of the conversation and we're all kind of learning together. Those are things that are pretty essential to me.
You know, some years ago, I participated in a workshop as a participant in Los Angeles, um, maybe 7 years ago now. And the intention was finding your calling.
Mm.
And I was, what, 75 years old at the time. You think by that time I would have figured out what my calling is. And
This is like 6 years ago. Uh-huh.
yeah, 6, 7 years ago, yeah. Now, but it wasn't, it's like what you said earlier. It wasn't about me or any particular individual of what I can attain or achieve or whatever. It was more about what imprint do I want to leave in the world.
Yeah.
Once I'm no longer gone here, not how I'll be remembered personally, but what imprint would I
Yeah.
have wanted to leave. And what I got is that my calling is that people are free.
Mm.
They're free.
Mm.
And now that doesn't mean I serve that calling always well, or sometimes I may not serve it at all, but that's what calls me. Um, and that freedom um, does have to do with consciousness because if we're not conscious, we're not free.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
whether I'm talking about politics in the Middle East or North America for that matter, or whether I'm talking about people's individual growth, I just want, I want to be free from
Mm.
from what Peter Levine, the psychologist, calls the tyranny of the past,
Yeah.
all the impact of that. But I also want to be free in the political sense.
Yeah.
But that's the calling. So for me, that's what's essential, is freedom. And then you have to look at all the conditions,
Hmm.
which is consciousness and awareness, because without that, we really are like puppets on a string, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, the kind of like, was it blue pill, red pill, or like you
yeah,
literally
yeah, yeah.
in like a hypnotic state. It's real, right?
Well,
It's not a,
let me find you another quote here on my, I mean, I have a million quotes on my cell phone here, more than I can ever possibly access or remember. But near where you are, in San Francisco, there's Berkeley, and Berkeley, there's a professor there called Robert Sapolsky, who you probably know.
yeah, yeah. I don't
Okay,
know him, but I appreciate his work.
yeah. So Sapolsky says, I'm quoting, excuse me, we are nothing more or less than the sum of that which we could not control, our biology, environments, and their interactions.
Hmm.
He says, there's no such thing as free will. And that's almost right.
Tell me about the
Because,
almost. Tell me about the
because,
almost.
because I think free will is attainable, but it needs tremendous awareness, tremendous consciousness.
Yeah. And I would even say that to think of it as free as an individual is super interesting, right? So,
Yeah,
to what extent are we actually, it's me doing this thing and I did it versus there's something
yeah,
deeper that we're following and that's guiding us. And to me, that's a little bit different than the I that gets so dominant, where it's like I'm doing this and I'm deciding. It's like I think ideally, Gabor, we're just expressions of this universal intelligence. I don't know if it started 13.8 billion years ago at the Big. I don't know where this human, but there does seem to be an intelligence that is inherent in each
sure,
one
yeah,
of us and can guide us.
sure,
Yeah. And
sure.
I don't know where Zapolsky is with that, but the level, the perspective on how much conditioning we all have and to think that we're making a choice 99% of the time, it's probably the conditioning making a choice.
Exactly. And I know that Dan Siegel, you've had him at your conference, and Dan talks about the lie of the separate solo self.
Yeah.
And that's kind of,
And yeah, and I don't like to, I think I get into some a time of complaining where I'm like, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. And I think there's a place for that. And I'm just going to complain a little bit because I think that the lie of that separate self, if you look at a lot of the
yeah,
technologies of our age, they
yeah,
reinforce that lie because it
yeah,
makes them money.
yeah,
And this is a system that we have developed collectively. We have developed this system. And
yeah,
can humanity evolve in such a way that a new system can be created that doesn't have to feed off of kids and particularly young people's lack of connection to source?
yeah,
And if we can do something different, and to me, that's the invitation. It's both individual and it's collective, and it also requires that we own all these pieces, right? Like I think in the past we had these teachers. They pretend like, oh, I don't have ego, or I don't have desire, I don't have like wanting of money, and then you like fast forward 5 years, they're sleeping with all their students and they're like embezzling money because they push that aside, right? Like they're like, oh,
yeah,
it's not in me. And what I see now, which is so exciting, I think largely through your work with trauma, we actually begin to get in touch with those parts of ourselves and we heal those parts of ourselves so they don't have to play out on the world stage. And I'm hoping that more and more leaders we will be birthing more and more leaders because it's the only way.
don't hold your breath on that one,
Okay.
because the people raise it, the system raises to power people who are completely committed to that way of looking at it, and it rewards them. I mean,
Yeah.
Donald, Donald Trump, if he was greedy and selfish and manipulative and dishonest on a street level, he'd be ostracized and hated, and perhaps even in jail.
Yeah.
But people that manage to do it on a massive scale, and I'm including, I'm not singling him out. He's a particular example and a very sort of more authentic example because he's just not afraid to say it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at all the American presidents who've womanized,
Hmm.
Kennedy was a
Hmm.
serial, dishonest, manipulative womanizer
Sure.
whose staff pimped and prepared, and primed women on his behalf. Um, we don't have to talk about the sexual peccadillos of Bill Clinton. The only difference is Trump says it.
Yeah.
He says you can just grab him by the pussy because you can do it.
Yeah.
And everybody says, "Oh my God, how can you say this?"
Oh, and his ratings go up, or his like,
And yeah, and
yeah,
people think he's authentic. Well, so
yeah.
what am I saying? I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just saying.
Here's
Oh yeah,
my
oh yeah. The what you say about people in power? No, they never get it because they get rewarded for it.
Yeah. But the reason they get rewarded for it, Gabor, is we've collectively created conditions that reward. And we can uncollectively create those conditions.
I don't remember collectively creating this. Do you? What morning did you wake up and decide that you wanted to create this system?
I helped create that system by clicking certain links that have no purpose and meaning and that are part of that system. And I've clicked those links many, many times. And I've told that system, feed me more of that stuff.
Okay, fair enough. We bought into it, we feed off it. Creating it,
Or maybe not creating it, but but
yeah.
but but I'd like to think that we're empowered collectively to recreate a new system. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm holding a belief, and maybe that's where I'm getting at. I'm holding a belief that collectively, as more and more people shift, the system shifts, and then the system rewards certain behaviors. And it
Yeah,
all started because certain humans had a certain thought. So if
yeah,
other humans have a different thought, seemingly
yeah,
that same momentum can happen.
yeah. Well, I mean, I would have to think so, Soren, because otherwise, what's the point of even
Yeah.
talking?
Yeah.
What's even the point of this conversation?
All
If,
right, we're on the same page with that.
if we don't think that on some level, movement and progress and awareness are possible and necessary and attainable, we wouldn't be talking to each other.
Yeah, and it does because I have that direct experience and you have that direct experience and everyone listening to this has that direct experience at moments.
Yeah,
Right? You would not be listening. This would make no fucking sense to anybody who didn't have
yeah,
some
yeah,
orientation to that experience. And so we
yeah.
know based on our direct experience now how fast that develops and what pace that develops and what the other conditioning is. There's like a lot that's out of our control. But I think, Gabor, you're such an amazing example of somebody who's so dedicated to something and it emerged within the culture in a way that changed the culture. And it wasn't just you, that's all other people, right? But like there was an emergence of something, and it was just because enough people were passionately, compassionately bringing something forth that the world needed to hear. And
Well, yeah, there's certain waves that sometimes you catch a wave and sometimes you don't.
yeah, I think that's true. And if you try to catch a wave, you usually don't catch a wave. You usually just have
Yeah,
to follow your heart, and the wave catches you.
that's
And
right.
that's the best way. That's the best way. Well, I think we're almost out of time. I realized I was going to have time for some questions, but maybe we'll just see if we can bring in one person who has some very interesting or strong opinions. You can raise your hand, and we'll bring you in.
So if you have a strong and interesting opinion, raise your hand right now. Otherwise, shut up.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but Payan?
Pavan or
Oh,
Payan?
Pavan?
Yeah,
I need to pronounce it.
Pavan. Pavan is
Okay,
great.
sorry, Pavan. Awesome.
That's okay. Pavan is an oven. That's how I
Hmm.
say it. My question was, do you think the world is really chaotic more than it's ever been? Or is it just that we are hyper aware of every single thing that's happening, especially the bad things? And that's now part of our consciousness much more than it's ever been in our humanity.
Can I read you something else?
Okay. Yes, please.
Um, okay, this is I'm gonna quote you something, okay? When an uninstructed worldling comes upon gain, he does not reflect on it. Oh, sorry. No, no, no. Sorry. Okay, no. He says, greed, hatred, and delusion of every kind are unwholesome. Whatever action a greedy, hating, and deluded person heaps up, by deeds, words, or thoughts, is unwholesome. Whatever such a person, overpowered by greed, hate, and delusion, his thoughts controlled by them, inflicts under false pretense upon another by killing, imprisonment, confiscation of property, false accusation, and expulsion, being prompted in this by the thought, I have power and I want power, all that is unwholesome too. Now, who said that? The Buddha said it 2,500 years ago. Greed, imprisonment, false accusation, expulsion. He's talking about Gaza, but he's talking about it 2,500 years ago. So if you're asking, is this new? No, it isn't. Uh, it goes back to what Soren and I were talking about before. Of we're getting to an inflection point
Mhm.
where it's going to be unsustainable because if nothing else because of climate change. So I think the sense of crisis is greater, but the reality is being here for a long time.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
See, Lenny, you
You're
asked to mute, I think.
Okay, got it.
You're alive, right?
Um, Hi. Okay, I'm great. Gabor, I listened to your when you and your sons talked about Gaza and Israel and the whole all of that. What it was so inspiring for me and so important as a Jew. Okay, how do you see it now? Is anything improved? Is anything different? Has anything changed since you and your sons talked several months ago?
And by the way, that was a couple of years ago now, a year and a half.
Yes.
And Soren and
Oh,
I also had a conversation about it, which is also on YouTube.
oh God.
Well, well, since we've talked, tens of thousands of people have died. children's limbs are being amputated without anesthetic because
Ah,
Israel won't let in medicines. Um, Deliberate starvation. Um, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, 2 weeks ago in Baltimore, there was a convention of 2,000 people in independent Jewish voices, young Jewish people getting together, standing opposed to what is being done in their name. So that movement has certainly burgeoned. And I travel internationally, um, and I speak internationally, and I talk about trauma and health and so on. I talked to 28,000 people in Australia in February. I talked to about 12,000 people across 3 cities in the U.S. just last week. I don't go anywhere without mentioning Gaza. And everywhere I do, there's tremendous appreciation and applause. Uh, Now, I know that the people that don't agree with me don't come to my talks, you know, but what I'm saying is, if you ask me what has changed is the international awareness that is not reflected in the media, but certainly is reflected in people's consciences. And let me tell you, the hearts of millions of people are breaking every day around the world right now, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
They
Thank you
need
so much.
they need to be breaking, and so I think that's people's consciousness has changed. The situation on the ground has only got more dire.
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
Question, Lenny.
Thank you.
So we're at our time, Gabor. I was wondering, is there anything you want to leave us with today?
Well, look. So um, Lenny just asked me this question. There might be people on the call who see that whole situation totally differently. I appreciate that. Um, Sometimes people on this issue and or many other issues can't even conceive where the other person is even coming from.
Yeah,
And I think that has to go back to what you and I talked about earlier when I talk about identification and awareness. So
yeah,
I just think I don't care what you think about anything. Not that I don't care. I can't influence what you think about anything, and
yeah,
nor should I try to. Um, but just keep asking yourself, how do I know what I know?
mm,
And what am I identifying with?
yeah,
And what do I have difficulty letting go of? What information threatens my identity? And am I willing to reconsider my identity
mhm,
in order to arrive at a deeper truth?
yeah.
Um, that's what I would say. And with that, I have to thank you, Soren, for this wonderful conversation. I got to run to my next gig.
All right, you got to run to your next kid. So let everybody can unmute. Gabor, you need to go, and we can say goodbyes and blessings. So you can unmute yourself.
Thank
And
you
say
so
goodbye.
much.
Thank you.
So much,
Thanks so
Gabor.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye, everyone.
Profound
I love you guys.
gratitude.
Thank you.
God
Okay.
bless you.
Thank
Next
you.
time,
Thank you,
Bye.
Soren.
Hi, Soren.
Love to.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
That was
Soren. Thank you,
intense.
Gabor.
Gabor's always kind of brings it. So hopefully we'll continue our journey for the next sessions. I think we have 3 more.
Yes.
So we can continue to kind of dive into these conversations. But I think what you see with Gabor is somebody who's he's learning and he's growing and he's like emerging. And I just always feel super lucky just to kind of be in his presence and kind of see the balance between a strong social activist and somebody who's deeply trying to work on himself. And
Super honest.
yeah,
Yeah.
super honest. And I had gone there to interview him after when
I
the
saw that.
conflict started
Yeah.
happening. It was intense because everyone was just kind of triggered on both sides, right? Like, and it's been sweet to see him kind of keep his heart, but also soften a bit in terms of like really making space that everybody sees certain things differently, and we
Yeah.
need to hear each other out and present our particular opinion. And I do think it comes back to us discovering kind of who we really are and looking at our own stories and narratives and waking up and trusting that as we do that, the world wakes up.